Okay, well, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you making it out to a service. Again, that's a pretty standard line, but I mean it every single time I say it. I appreciate so much seeing your faces and I just like seeing you here. So thanks for coming here. I also want to welcome those of you watching online from wherever you might be. Thanks for tuning in as well. We are wrapping up a series today called Preventative Maintenance. We've been in it since the beginning of the year. Not going to recap anything. But if you have not seen any of the messages, or if you missed a couple weeks here and there, I strongly encourage you to go online to check out those messages. I just believe they will be beneficial for your life as we look at God's instructions and how they benefit us. So, that's that. Now, I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it again. I absolutely love Chris Stapleton, okay? I just do. I love his songs. I think he's one of the few singer-songwriters who tells stories in his songs that are so popular today. Most people just sing about stupid stuff, and I don't like popular music, but Chris Stapleton is different. His music is fantastic. I love his guitar tone. Okay, as a guitarist, that is the tone I am going for. His chords, his solos, all that stuff. You're not a guitarist, so you don't care, but I love it. It is fantastic. But the thing I love most about Chris Stapleton is his voice, okay? His voice is the prime voice. It is the best vocals I've ever heard in my life, in my opinion, which is, of course, the standard for everything in this world, my opinion. His voice is the top of the ladder. None of this blowing in the wind sort of stuff. Chris Stapleton's voice is so good. Okay, it's got the perfect amount of grit. He can switch from chest voice to head voice and back to chest voice on a dime. And if you don't know what that means, just trust me, it's amazing. He does it effortlessly. He can hit vocal runs quietly, full power. When I think about the best voice I can possibly think of, it to me is Chris Stapleton. And there have been times when I'm just sitting at my house and I've got it blaring on the speakers and I'm just sitting there on the couch listening. And I will look to my wife and tell her, I would do anything to be able to sing like Chris. I just would. I would do anything. Almost anything. Okay, I wouldn't give up my kids, wouldn't give up my marriage, but almost anything else is on the table. If I could achieve that, if I could attain, if I could be guaranteed that I could have Chris Stapleton's voice, I would cut off my own legs. Okay? That is not an overstatement. I promise you, if I could be guaranteed, I would do it. And I wouldn't cut off my arms. I still need those to play guitar. But my legs, get rid of them. I love his voice so much, and I want to emulate it. I can't ever do it, but it's incredible. Now, when I tell you that, most of you laughed, and you probably think I'm being ridiculous, okay? But I'm not. You're wrong. His voice is the best. But there are things in your life that you would do almost anything for, right? There are things that are so important or so meaningful, or things you want to accomplish, achieve, or do, that when you think about it, you would say, man, I would do almost anything, I would give almost anything so that I could accomplish this. For some of you, it's shooting a monster buck. I couldn't care any less about that, but some of you want to shoot, is it over 200? I don't even know what that means, but over 200 on some made-up hunter scale. Some of you would give anything to do that. Some of you would do anything to go on that dream vacation. Man, you've been Pinterest boarding it for years, and you dream about wherever it might be that you want to go. Some of us would do anything to be able to go fishing again, to run again. Maybe your body isn't able to do the things that you once could, and man, if I could just do that, I would give anything. It was so meaningful, so valuable to me. Some of us would give anything to have our marriage restored or fixed. Some of us would give anything to be on better speaking terms with a brother or a sister. If you've lost a loved one, what would you do to have another hour with them? With your mom or your dad? With a child that you lost? With a spouse? To be able to talk to them, to be able to give them a hug, to say, I love you, and hear those words back, to say, I'm sorry, and hear, I forgive you back. Right? There are some things in our lives that are so important and so meaningful that for us, we would do almost anything to if there was any possible way of that happening. So I want to ask you a question, okay? And this question is going to seem really odd at first. I'm just letting you know. Just hang tight with me. I want us to ponder this question for a moment. And my guess is that most of us will not have an answer for this question right away, okay? So just think about it. I'll give you a moment to reflect. But here's the question for today. What would you be willing to do for the church to continue? Not the person next to you, not what you think society should do, but you personally. What would you, all of you watching online, what would you be willing to do for the church to continue? Now, we are not in danger of closing our doors, okay? We're not going bankrupt or anything like that. Just everybody relax. But I think this is a question that is worth asking ourselves. What would you be willing to do for this church to continue? What would you be willing to do for the big C, all Christian churches in our community to continue? What would you be willing to do, or what would you give in order for the church in our state or in our nation to continue? What would you be willing to do for the church of Jesus Christ around the world to continue and accomplish its mission, its God-given mission? What would you do? What would you give? Well, when you think about that, what would you be willing to do? We've been in a series this whole month called Preventative Maintenance. And as we've talked about different things, we've seen how important preventative maintenance is. We talked about for our marriages that they won't continue, or at least they won't be as happy or healthy as they could be if we don't do some preventative maintenance, if we don't work to make our marriages better. In parenting, we talked about how our kids will not just automatically grow up to be responsible, hardworking, compassionate people who love God. They don't come out that way. It's our job as parents to do preventative maintenance, to train and to discipline and to teach. Last week, we talked about how easy it is for us to make poor decisions, to make unwise choices, unless we stop to pause and ponder, to do some preventative maintenance so that we can make better decisions. We've seen that preventative maintenance is crucial, it is important, it does matter, it does make a difference. So why would the church be any different? I'm just going to be real honest with us this morning. I think you and I, everybody watching online, I think we have taken this thing called the church for granted. I think we've just assumed that the church is always going to be around. And again, I'm not talking about this specific church. I'm not talking about drywall and studs and a roof. The church is, it's part building, but it's people, it's ministries, it's services, it's programs, it's relationships, it's hearing the word of God, it's challenging one another. All of that thing is encompassed in the church. And I think we've just assumed that it's always going to be here. Because for every single one of our lives, it has been, hasn't it? We've all grown up, and the church, whether it's this church or other churches, they've just always been around. You know, our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. There was a time when our nation was at least labeled as a Christian nation, but not anymore. In fact, we are a post-Christian nation. There is a growing segment of our culture that is against God, that is against Christianity, or at least the version of Christianity that they've heard. So why do we still assume that the church is always going to be here? Why do we assume that it's always going to be around? Some of us first started coming to the church because we were invited by somebody. I know that's my story. And thankfully, there was a place for them to invite us to. And at least at this church, I hope if you've been invited, whether it was years ago or whether it's your first time here today, hopefully you've found or discovered that this isn't what you thought it would be, that it's different, that the music is good, that it's relevant to our lives, that you can understand what's going on. There's not a bunch of weird stuff you don't know. I know when I first started coming here, it was just great to see normal people. But here's the question I had to ask myself as I was thinking about the message this week and thinking about preventative maintenance. Why did I just assume that the church was going to be open? Why did I assume that there was going to be a church there for me to go? I mean, I'd never done anything to ensure that was going to happen. I'd never done any preventative maintenance for that, so why assume? Some of us first started coming to church, or our first experience with God was because of a tragedy in our life. Maybe we lost someone, or battling addiction, or whatever it might be. Our life was a wreck. And we came, and thankfully we discovered God. We experienced His presence. We started a relationship with Him. But why do we just assume that that's going to continue? Again, I think we've taken for granted that the church is just always going to be here, and there's going to be services, it's going to be open for us when we need it. But why? When people call from the community, when people in our city need assistance, what's the first place they call? The church. Hey, I'm just wondering, I can't pay my bills, or I need help with gas money, or whatever it might be. And I never say this on the phone, okay? But inside, I think to myself, I want to ask them, what makes you think we have anything to give? Like, do you just assume we have some magic money fountain from God that just spits out dollar bills? Here's the thing. I think we've forgotten that there's some preventative maintenance, and we've assumed that the church is going to always be around. And so again, I want to ask you this question. What would you be willing to do for the church to continue? What would you personally be willing to do, give, serve, say, whatever, so that this thing, not just our church, but the Big C church, is going to be around 10 years, 20 years from now? In the New Testament, there are several letters written to pastors and church leaders. They're written by a man named Paul. And in one of those letters, he's addressing his kind of younger protege. His name is Timothy. And he starts off with all these instructions about how to run a church and how to, watch out for these things and don't go to that and stay focused on this. And then he writes something incredible about the church. He says this. He says, I'm writing these things to you now, even though I hope to be with you soon, so that if I am delayed, you will know how people must conduct themselves in the household of God. This is the church. Again, not talking about drywall and studs, but everything that's encompassed in the church. This is the church of the living God, which is the pillar and foundation of the truth. I think we've forgotten how important the church is. There's nobody besides the church that is fighting for the intrinsic value of every human being, because every human being, young, old, poor, rich, black, white, male, female, doesn't matter, put any descriptor, there's nobody else fighting for the value of every human being, because every human being is made in the image of God except the church. And that's not it. On top of that, there is nobody else fighting for compassion and mercy for some of the most overlooked and underappreciated people in our society. I mean, I know there are different social organizations that do that, but not all of these things that the church is a part of and that the church is doing. There's nobody else who is on top of those other things teaching fathers and mothers how to raise their children to be, productive, responsible, God-loving people in society. There's nobody else in our society who's teaching people good financial principles so that our lives are better and free of debt. There's nobody else that values the differences between men and women and how they complement each other because of their differences and being created that way. All of those things, there's nobody else who does all of them week in and week out except the church of Jesus Christ. Do you know who was responsible for spreading medicine and education primarily in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries? It was missionaries. It was the church of Jesus Christ. Still today, the church is responsible for building more wells and orphanages around our world. Some of the most remote places around the world is the church of Jesus Christ. I found a Gallup poll that was done just a few weeks ago where they asked Americans to rate their mental health. Maybe you've seen this before, but they were to self-rate their mental health from 2019 to 2020. Do you know the only group whose mental health increased in 2020? It was people who attended religious services weekly. Not monthly, not sometimes, but weekly. Any other factor that they measured, gender, income, marital status, anything else you put on that they measured, everybody had a worse mental health in 2020, except for people who attended religious services weekly, which in our country is still primarily Christian church services. It benefits our mental health. There was a police chief several decades ago. His name was Dave DeBratka, and I don't know if he's running for re-election or just talking to some reporters or whatever, but he was telling people, he was telling his staff, listen, I financially support the church. Even if I didn't believe in the church, I would still financially support them because they are the only organization from his perspective that was on the side of the police, that was teaching kids to be honest, that was teaching them not to break the laws, to be responsible, to not hurt other people. For him, it was so clear and so apparent that the church was the only organization who was on the side of the police. He wanted everybody to know and everybody to support the church. That's how important it was. But when Paul writes to Timothy that the church is the pillar and foundation of truth, he's not just talking about those things for our life and society and culture, and so things go well for the 80 years we're here on earth. I mean, all that is good and amazing, and nobody else does all of that. But even more than that, the church is the pillar and foundation of truth for eternity. Because there is no other institution or organization or gathering that has the message of eternal salvation. There isn't. There is no other institution or organization or gathering that teaches people how to connect with God and build a relationship with him. There is no other institution in our world, no nonprofit, no lobby group, no nothing that is fighting for absolute truth and absolute right and wrong and objective, not subjective morality. We've just overlooked how essential and crucial and important and life-changing this thing called the church is, the pillar and foundation of the truth. We've missed it. We've overlooked it. We've assumed it's always going to be around. And so I want to ask you this question again. What would you and me, what would you be willing to do for the church to continue? Because I believe there's some preventative maintenance that we need to take. Over the past 20, 30, 40 years, Christianity has been in decline in our culture, and it is declining at a faster rate than ever before. How long till Christianity is gone in our world, in our community, in our state? How long until churches aren't around anymore? Maybe there's some things that we could be doing to prevent that from happening. And not only just prevent it, but that on our watch, the church is not going to go down, but it is going to build and grow and get stronger than ever because we see the value of this thing called the church. What would you be willing to do for the church to continue? No, I'm not saying that I have the exhaustive end-all, be-all list. I don't. But I have some ideas. See, I know the Bible pretty well. I've been in church work for a couple decades now. I've seen people come and go. I have studied and tried to learn from other successful churches in our culture and in our nation. I have studied the early church in the first century and tried to discover what made them so successful, how they changed the world from just a little grassroots movement of 120 people. And the thing is it's not rocket science. There's no silver bullet. There's no like, oh my gosh, I never thought of doing that before. It's some back to basic stuff that is preventative maintenance for the church of Jesus Christ, for this church, for the other churches in our community, for the church around the world. There is some preventative maintenance that you and I can be doing. The first one is this. Just attend. I mean, simply showing up is good preventative maintenance for the church of Jesus Christ. Look how the author of Hebrews writes this. He says this, "Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." If you want to be a part of preventative maintenance for the church, just be here. Attending is such a simple step. And attending looks like attending all sorts of gatherings, whether that's weekend services, whether that's night of worship, whether that's small groups. Anytime the church gets together, if we want to be a part of preventative maintenance, we should be there because we are more likely to grow in our relationship with God and pursue him more together. We have a bigger voice and influence in our community when we are together. When we sing, either on Sunday mornings or, last Wednesday night of worship, that there is power when we lift our voices together. And I don't know about you, but I'm encouraged when I hear you sing, even though some of you have terrible voices. Okay? I'm encouraged when I hear us sing. It's through small groups that we can challenge one another and hold each other accountable and build strong relationships together. There is power in simply being here. I've said this so many times to so many people. You can make a difference in the mission simply by putting your butt in the seats. Because what about when you and I invite people? It's going to be a better experience if the room's not half empty, and so many different other things. And listen, I know that we live in an online kind of face in our screens world. And online's great, okay? Online's convenient. Some of you are watching this online right now. Some of you have health concerns, and especially in the season of life we're in, watching online has been a lifeline for you. Online is a great tool, okay? We're going to continue to invest more time and energy and money into doing more things online. But, especially you watching online, it is not a replacement for physical relationships. Online is not a replacement for in-person, face-to-face gatherings. It just isn't. I don't say this to criticize, but I honestly feel bad for those of you who have only watched online since last March. I feel bad. My heart breaks because you've missed out on so much. You've missed out on the benefit of relationships. You've missed out on singing with other people. You've missed out on just seeing faces and being encouraged by other people pursuing God like you're pursuing God. If you and I want to be a part of preventative maintenance, of making sure the church doesn't go down on our watch, then simply being here is a great step. It is a crucial step. It is an essential step. If you and I, if we're the type of people that only show up a few times a year, try once a month. If you show up once a month, try every other week. If you're a person who normally comes every single Sunday, but that's it, try getting in a small group. Come to nights of worship. The more we are around, the more we are physically here, the more the church will be successful and accomplish the mission that God has called us to. And unfortunately, I've seen it so many times. When people start to drift in their relationship with God, one of the first things to go is they stop attending regularly. Do we want the church to be influential? Do we want to reach more people? Do we want God's mission to continue in this world? One of the preventative maintenance steps is simply attending. Another one is this, probably goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway. Pray. Pray. Pray for the church. Pray for the mission. I think we've become so accustomed to assuming that prayer is just like, God, here's my grocery list of things I need you to do and grant my wishes. But prayer can be a powerful preventative maintenance for the church and the mission. In one of his letters, Paul asked some of his friends to pray for him. And this is what he says. He says, pray for me too. Ask God to give me the right words so I can boldly explain God's mysterious plan, that the good news is for Jews and Gentiles alike, that salvation is available to anybody who wants it, to anybody who would put their trust in Jesus. He says, I'm in chains now, but I'm still preaching this message as God's ambassador. So pray that I will keep on speaking boldly for him as I should. When was the last time you prayed for the church? When was the last time you prayed for this church? You know, I prayed to God a couple weeks ago when the Mega Millions was almost $1 billion. He didn't say yes to that one. I had great plans. He didn't say yes. But I would stake my life on the fact that he would say yes to that kind of prayer. When was the last time you prayed for the church? God, I pray that you would strengthen your church. God, I pray that you would give endurance to the people in your church accomplishing your mission. God, I pray that you'd give wisdom to the leaders. God, I pray that you would meet the financial needs of the church. God, I pray that your mission would reach more and more people. James, the half-brother of Jesus himself, says that prayer is powerful and it is effective. And I just believe that the church would be more powerful and more effective if Christians, if you and I, would simply start to pray, if we would take a preventative maintenance approach and pray for the work of God that we're involved in and the work of God around our world. So that's number 2. The next one is this. Serve. Get involved in ministry. Volunteer somewhere. Okay? You don't need to go to seminary to make a difference. You don't need to know all of the books of the Bible in order and answer a test with 100% in order to start volunteering. Everybody, literally every single one of us can be involved. At least at this church you can. There's a spot for everybody. Now there's so many scriptures that talk about this, but honestly I just picked the most succinct one. It says this: He makes the whole body, it's talking about the church, the people, the whole body fit together perfectly, as each part does its own special work. Not as 10% do all the work, not as a select few do all the work, but as each part, you and I, every single one of us do our special work. It helps the other parts grow so that the whole body, so that the whole church is healthy and growing and full of love. Every single one of us from God have been given gifts and talents and abilities and passions for the sake of his mission. Now, I just led a youth Bible study for middle school and high school students a couple weeks ago on a Sunday morning. That ain't my thing, okay? Try to think of a nice way to say that. I had fun, it was awesome, but I talked to God about it afterwards. He reconfirmed, yes, that ain't your thing. Don't do that again, okay? But maybe it's your thing. Maybe you have a passion to see middle schoolers and high schoolers develop a relationship with God of their own, to have that foundation and know how to make wise choices before they go off to college, before they live on their own. If so, our youth ministry is the place for you. If you're a musician, hello, what are you waiting for? We have a stage with bright lights and a great sound system and better technology than any place in a 30-mile radius. In fact, it is better than some venues I have been to down in the cities. That's your gift, man. Serve, volunteer, be a part of what God's doing. If you don't really like people that much, but you want to do some stuff on your own, man, we have grounds and maintenance and cleaning spots, all that sort of stuff. If you're an extrovert and you love to talk to people, okay, that's not me, but if that's you, we have spots for you. If you like to touch buttons and move faders and play with cameras, like our tech team is fantastic. If you have a passion for little kids and you want to be a good role model and you want to show them that church can be fun so that they understand that as they grow up and they hopefully have that foundation for the rest of their lives, then our kids ministry is the place to be. You can serve food once a month at Ruby's Pantry. There are so many places, and I just want to ask you, are you using your God-given gifts? Are you setting aside some of your time to work on preventative maintenance for the church to advance his mission in this world? Are you? Because that's part of what preventative maintenance looks like. The next one is everybody's favorite. Give. The money one. And you know what? This list wouldn't be complete without it. The mission requires funding. Unfortunately, there's no money cloud that hangs over this church or any other church. The mission of God absolutely cannot, 100% will fail without this piece. And I know I've heard it before, maybe not verbally, but I've certainly seen it in people's attitudes over the years at this church and at other churches and just Christianity in general. But this idea of, well, I do this one a bunch, so I don't have to do this one. Not true. It's not just one or two of them, it's all of them. It's all of the above. This is what preventative maintenance looks like. Paul writes this to the Corinthians about this giving topic. He says, since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, your enthusiasm, your love from us, your attendance, your prayers, your serving, since you're awesome in a lot of other ways, I want you to excel also in this gracious act of giving. He goes on to write this. Now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have. See, it's not an amount thing. It's not look at how much I gave. It's a heart thing. But this giving is an inescapable piece. It's something that we have to come to terms with. And I know that there are a lot of other things that we could spend our money on. There's toys to buy, there's things to do, there's house renovations, there's kids projects, all those sorts of things. I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. It's going to take sacrifice. It's going to require adjusting our priorities. But what's the church worth to you? I'm just being honest. What's it worth to you? Do you care about the mission of God in this world for you, for your family, for your friends, for your neighbors? Are you willing to do some preventative maintenance so that God's mission continues in this world? There's one more. I told you this wasn't an exhaustive list, but I was running out of room on the slide. So the last one is to simply share. To share the church. And by that, I mean to share our story, to invite people, to talk positively about what God has done in our life personally and through this thing called the church, to invite people to come to a service or to a small group or to a night of worship, to use our story to be bold with people about the benefit of God and the church in our lives. I think we've bought into this idea. It's been crammed down our throats for so long. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion. Wrong. I think that's wrong on both fronts, but especially on the second. We ought to talk more about our faith. We, those of us who are Christians at least, we have the greatest message the world has ever known. That God gave his one and only Son. That whoever would believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life. But that doesn't just go out by osmosis. That doesn't just happen because God wants to reach everybody. That happens if you and I are willing to do some preventative maintenance and share what we know with other people. To the Romans, Paul writes this: "For everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved." Thank God, salvation is available for everybody. But here's his just kind of think about it, ponder it. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless you and I tells them? Again, it's not rocket science. This is not stuff just reserved for pastors and church staff. This is for all of us. Are you willing to share? And I know in our culture today it can feel uncomfortable. People are so judgmental about any topic, and if they disagree with you, man, you just get canceled. But are we willing to share? Are we willing to take some of that, I'm not going to call it persecution because it's not persecution, but some of that uncomfortableness? Are we willing to be bold enough to share what God has done in our life and the value we see in the church? That when we hear other people talk about how bad Christians are, to say, no, maybe that's some, but you don't know the ones I know. You don't know what God has done in the people I know. When people talk about the church, all the church wants is your money. No, maybe that's true at some, but you don't know what my church is about. How much we want something for you, not something from you. And listen, this list, right, this whole list, this is what preventative maintenance looks like. It is. It's not one of them. It's not two of them. It's all of them. Are we willing to do it? Are you and I willing to put in the work that's going to be necessary so that the church can continue, so that the mission that God gave his one and only Son for can continue in this world? Look, there are some of you here today that you are doing all of them, and I just want to say thank you so much. I believe if God, were to stand right next to me and audibly talk, he would say thank you. Thank you for loving me so much. Thank you for dedicating your lives to my mission. There are some of us here, some of us watching online. We're doing a few of them, but I would challenge you to do them all. Again, not just one, not just two, but all the time. This is what preventative maintenance for the church looks like. And I'm going to be real honest, okay? There's some of us here today, there's some of us watching online, and we are Christians. We have put our faith in Jesus Christ. We are connected and we are made right with God. And we're not doing any of them. Now, I'm not here to condemn, but I am here to tell you the truth. That is not God's will. That is not God's will for your life. Now, this has nothing to do with us being made right with God. This is not a determining factor in whether we go to heaven or not. This has nothing to do with our salvation. But it has everything to do with someone else's salvation. Do you get it? Do we understand? See, this isn't about us trying to butter God up or like, God, maybe you'll answer my prayers if I do something. No. We are made right with God completely when we put our faith in Jesus. This is a response to that incredible gift. This is a way of saying, thank you, God, for everything you have done in my life. I want to be a part of you reaching other people. I want to be a part of what you are doing in this world. That's what it looks like. And for me, I love the church, okay? I do. I love the Big C church, and probably even more, I love this church. I'm a better father because of the influence of the church. I'm a better husband because of the influence of the church. I'm a better friend because of the influence of the church. I'm a better citizen of this country because of the influence of the church. I'm going to heaven when I die someday because of Jesus' death and resurrection, which is the central message of the church. I experience God's presence and want to experience him more because of the example and the emphasis of the church. My life is so much better because of this thing called the church. And I would guess that if you, anybody watching online, if you are any of those things or even more, I bet if we sat down and talked long enough, we could trace it back to the influence of the church in your life as well. So for the last time this morning, I want us to ask ourselves this question. What would you be willing to do for the church to continue? What sort of preventative maintenance would you engage in so that the mission of God would continue? Because here's the truth. The church is God's plan A to reach the world, and there is no plan B. There's no backup. There's no alternative. If this church thing goes down, so does the mission of God. What would you be willing to do for the church to continue? Listen, I'm going to invite the band to come back up, and they're going to lead us in one more song this morning. But as they do, don't pay attention to them. I just want to read you some verses, and we're not going to put them on the screen because I don't want you to read. I just want you to maybe even just close your eyes and think about these verses that I'm going to read. I want you to ponder what's written, because for me, these verses are inescapable. Every time I read these verses, I am challenged to the core of who I am, about my purpose in life, about what I'm created for, about what my response ought to be to the incredible gift that God gave me through Jesus Christ. I'm not even going to comment in between the verses, just listen. It's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. Either way, Christ's love controls us. Since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we have all died to our old life. He died for everyone so that those who receive his new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ, who died and was raised for them. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun. And all of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. He gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God.